All right, welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at some excerpts from a Valuetainment YouTube video you guys sent in.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, some pretty interesting commentary on what's happening over in Ukraine.
Definitely.
So basically, to set the stage here, the video really focuses on some recent comments from Donald Trump, and he's saying it's time for Ukraine to hold elections, kind of hinting that maybe Zelenskyy isn't doing so hot anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah. And on top of that, there are these pretty serious allegations being thrown around that U.S. aid isn't actually reaching the front lines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it might even be ending up in the wrong hands,
Yikes.
And if that wasn't enough to top it all off, Trump's suggesting that the U.S. should get a share of Ukraine's mineral wealth in exchange for all the support we've been giving them.
You know what's really fascinating to me here is how this whole thing, this whole situation, ties domestic politics right into the middle of this international conflict.
Yeah, totally.
We're seeing how public opinion about aid to Ukraine is really becoming a huge factor.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, are economic interests starting to shape foreign policy?
It really feels like there are so many different things going on here.
Absolutely.
And the video plays up this idea that Zelensky's lost the support of the people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're even claiming his approval rating is something crazy low.
Like what?
It's like 4%.
4%.
Yeah, and they even included this part where Trump says the honeymoon's over with Zelenskyy. It's intense.
Yeah, hold on a second, though. That 4% number, is that even real? I mean, the video doesn't actually give any sources for that.
Oh, that's a good point.
So it makes you think, is this really a call for democracy, or is it something else? Is it a move by Trump?
Right, and then there's that whole thing about billions in aid vanishing
Oh, yeah.
before it even reaches the soldiers who need her.
Yeah.
The video paints this picture of warehouses full of supplies just sitting there,
Oh, wow.
controlled by these shady Ukrainian figures.
See, that really plays into the growing skepticism people have about where all this aid is actually going
Right.
and if it's being used the right way.
Exactly, like, is it actually helping?
Right.
And the video even cites a Daily Caller poll that says 60% of Americans think all this foreign aid is just wasted money.
60%.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and, that just adds fuel to the fire.
Totally.
Like, it really shows how public opinion can have such a huge impact on decisions about aid in the future.
For sure.
Then there's this whole idea of the U.S. getting something tangible back for all the support we're giving.
Like what?
Specifically, they're talking about Ukraine's rare earth minerals
Ah, okay.
and how that would benefit the U.S.
So that brings up a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Should aid always be altruistic?
Right.
Like no strings attached? Or is it okay to expect something in return, some kind of quid pro quo?
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that asking for something in return might actually encourage countries to be more responsible with the aid
Yeah,
and make sure their interests line up with, whoever's giving the aid.
I see.
But then again, it could also be seen as taking advantage of countries that are already in a tough spot.
That's true.
Like, are they really in a position to negotiate when they desperately need help?
That's a great point.
Like, where do you draw the line between it being mutually beneficial and taking advantage of someone's situation?
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy question.
It's complicated. There's a lot to think about there.
It is.
It feels like this video is coming from a very specific perspective.
Okay.
They're definitely on Trump's side here,
Interesting.
but at the same time, they're bringing up some bigger questions that are worth thinking about.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter what your opinion is on Trump himself.
Right.
This situation forces us to look at the bigger picture.
For sure.
Like, what's the role of aid? How much does public opinion actually matter?
Right.
And, could economic interests actually be driving these foreign policy decisions more than we realize?
It's all connected.
It is. It's a really complex web.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there.
It's really striking how this video frames the whole Ukraine aid debate.
Yeah.
They use some pretty strong language.
Like what?
Like money laundering scheme and saying things like, the honeymoon's over.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they're trying to make you feel a certain way about it.
Right.
Paint a very negative picture of what's going on.
Yeah, you definitely get this sense of urgency from them.
Yeah.
Like they're tapping into that anxiety people have about the cost of this war.
For sure.
And if the aid is actually doing any good.
Exactly. And by focusing on Trump's business skills and how good he is at making deals,
Yeah.
they're kind of implying he's the one who can fix it all.
Right, like he'd hold everyone accountable.
Exactly.
And make sure America gets something out of this whole thing.
Yeah.
They also brought up Trump's first impeachment
Oh, yeah.
and all that controversy with Hunter Biden's business in Ukraine.
Oh, right.
It's almost like they're trying to imply there's some kind of pattern of corruption there.
That's a smart move, isn't it?
Yeah.
By connecting those past events to what's happening now, they're really trying to make people question everyone's motives.
And the way they talk about Zelenskyy,
Yeah.
it's like they're saying he's just a puppet.
Oh, interesting.
controlled by U.S. interests.
Yeah, it feels like they're trying to undermine Zelenskyy and make the whole Ukrainian government look bad.
Right. And then they bring up the media,
Oh, the media.
specifically CNN,
Uh-huh.
and how their coverage of the war has changed.
How so?
They claim all the increased scrutiny and skepticism is making public opinion change.
That's a good point because the media can really shape how people see things.
Oh, for sure.
Like the way they present the information, who they talk to, even just the tone of their reporting.
Totally.
It all influences how people understand complex issues.
And they also compare the U.S. involvement in Ukraine to other conflicts,
Like what?
like Afghanistan and Iraq.
Ah, I see.
And they're questioning why we get involved in these things.
It definitely taps into that feeling a lot of people have about the U.S., always getting involved in complicated situations overseas.
Right. And whether it's even worth it.
Right, like what are the long-term effects of all this?
Exactly. And then there's the whole thing about the rare earth minerals again,
Yeah.
and how America should get something in return for all the aid.
I mean, for some people, that argument makes sense.
Right.
Why should we be taken advantage of?
Right.
We should use our power to get something that helps us too.
But isn't that kind of risky? Like, could demanding something actually make things worse with our allies?
It's a tough situation.
Yeah,
You have to think about what could happen because of it.
definitely. One thing that really stood out to me was that analogy they used about being in debt.
Oh, what was that?
They said foreign aid is like keeping your Netflix subscription when you have much bigger financial problems.
Oh, that's good. That makes it easy to understand.
Right. It makes it seem like foreign aid is a luxury we can't afford right now.
Exactly. Like we have more important things to worry about here at home.
Yeah, it's like they're saying America's being taken advantage of.
By Ukraine and by our own politicians.
Exactly. And then they praise their own community.
Oh, yeah.
They call them the PBD podcast gang.
Yeah, huh?
And they talk about how supportive they are.
That's a smart way to get people on your side.
Yeah.
Like we're all in this together.
It's clear that this video is trying to get a reaction from people.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And they have a very specific message they're trying to get across.
They're using strong words, picking and choosing evidence, and making big claims to change people's minds.
But they are bringing up some important points that are worth considering.
Definitely. Even if you don't agree with everything they're saying,
Right.
the things they're talking about show how important it is to think critically
Yeah.
and really understand all the different parts of this conflict.
It's interesting how they talk about Russia in all of this.
Yeah, how so?
They definitely call out Russia for being aggressive.
Uh-huh.
But then they also kind of suggest that maybe the U.S. and NATO pushed Russia too far.
Oh,
Really, maybe it's partly our fault for how things got so bad.
It's a tough argument to make.
Yeah.
Trying to appeal to people who don't want the U.S. getting involved in other countries' business.
Right.
But at the same time, still saying that what Putin's doing is wrong.
It really speaks to that idea that maybe the U.S. should focus on its own problems
Right.
before getting involved in stuff happening across the world.
Yeah, like, should we be worrying about things over there
Right.
when we have things going on right here at home?
Exactly. It reminds me of those other conflicts they brought up.
Oh, yeah, like Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah. Makes you wonder if we're making the same mistakes again.
Right. Are we really learning from the past?
It feels like this whole conversation is just layers and layers of complexity.
It really is. And that's why these deep dives are so important.
Mhm.
It's about looking at all the different sides of the story
Right.
and really getting into the details so you can figure out what you think.
Not just taking things at face value.
Exactly. You got to think critically about it.
So where does all this leave us?
Well,
It seems like the debate over the U.S. being involved in Ukraine is really changing. People are starting to have doubts about how much it's costing us.
Yeah.
And whether the aid is actually doing what it's supposed to.
Right. And whether it's actually helping.
Exactly. So here's something to think about. How could this focus on getting something in return for aid, like some kind of trade deal?
Yeah.
How could that affect future aid and peace talks?
Interesting.
And could that lead to even more problems down the line?
That's a good question.
It's a really complicated situation.
It is.
And it's always changing.
For sure.
So it's super important to understand all the details if you want to form your own opinion about it.
Absolutely. It's about staying informed and thinking for yourself.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.